Let's see. First off, thanks everyone for joining us tonight. I appreciate everybody that's offered to volunteer to be a referee for this year's FTC competition. And without further ado, let's get started on talking about being a referee for the game this year. Okay, so what we're going to do tonight, I'm going to talk a little bit about the role of the referee, explain how to prepare, what to bring to the event, how to referee an event, and go quickly over some of the highlights of this year's rules. So our role obviously is to observe matches and identify rule violations and to make calls for those rule violations and for the scoring. We also want to inspire the teams and help the teams improve, so that's a little different than what it's like to be a referee at a sporting event. So we really want to be there to help the teams out. And another big part of our role is to keep the matches running on schedule. So, assuming that FTA's got the field working, it's really up to us to get the schedules to run on match, to get the matches to run on schedule. So how to prepare. First off, if you haven't already, please go to the new volunteer site. That's volunteer.firstwa.org. And you'll have to create an account. It's a whole new system. So if you had it's different than an account that you might have on the firstwa.org site. So create your event, and then you can either volunteer for a referee through the key roles page, or if you have specific events you want to attend, you can go to those events and sign up there. And eventually you'll want to go and volunteer to be a referee at the events that appeal to you. Obviously you need to read the rules. What we're going to do tonight is not a substitute for reading the rules. I just want to talk about some of the trickier bits. So yeah, you'll want to read all of the rules. And then there's also a Q&A that's described in the rules document where teams can ask questions and get answers, and a lot of times there will be refinements on the rules, so it's important to stay up on top of those. You also need to take and pass the ref test. That's a little up in the air. It's unclear to me exactly what FIRST is providing this year. It may be the case that FIRST will provide a ref test that we can use. Otherwise, I'll do the same thing I did last year, and Kathy and I will create a ref test just for First WA, and I'll let everybody that's signed into the system as a referee know about that once that's figured out. And we'll also have a rules reference card updated for this year. At the bottom of the screen is the URL for the FTC referee training page. Right now that's just got stuff on it from last year. We'll be updating that in the next few days and then adding updated materials as they become available. So what to bring to an event, bring safety glasses. You probably don't want to be stuck with whatever random safety glasses are available at the event, so bring something you're comfortable with. You'll want to bring a clipboard and a pen or pencil so you can take notes during the match. It's probably a good idea to bring a blank score sheet just so that if all else fails you can make copies of that to build the score sheet. So that's mostly for head refs. You'll also want to go to the US First website and get the game documents, the field document, and the field control setup documents, just so you have them there in case something melts down and you need to help out. I mentioned that we'll get an updated rules reference card up soon, and we'll have more interesting stuff on the resources page. So how to referee, I'll walk you through the different stages of the match and the event, and that'll tell you how to do it. So let's get started. So at the beginning of the event, when you first show up, as early as you can, you want to have a ref meeting, get all the refs together with the head ref, go over the rules, answer any questions, talk about the summary card if that's helpful. And then there's a bunch of things that will be going on simultaneously, especially the head ref should check on the field setup and make sure that that's being done correctly. You'll want to get whoever's organizing the field to set up the referee question box. So what that is it's say a 2 or 3 foot square outline on the floor with a question mark in it, and then we'll tell students that if they have a question for the referees, they're supposed to come and stand in that box, and that just helps us keep the matches going and pay attention to students when they have a question. The head ref will need to print and create a team list. You can usually get a team list from the scorekeeper, and then you want to use that to keep notes so that you can remember, oh, I warned team XYZ to, have the robot on the field on time, so you can keep track of teams that repeatedly violate rules. And also so that we can note examples of gracious professionalism or of non-gracious professionalism for the judges. That can be a big help for the judges. Okay, so the match schedule, I haven't actually double-checked this, but I believe we'll still try to have teams play 6 rounds with a match spacing of 7 minutes. Because the league events are small, it's possible that teams will have back-to-back matches, have to play back-to-back matches, and we'll still guarantee that they have 5 minutes between matches. Or I guess if the match, 5 minutes between the end of their previous match till the next match begins, so that if they have to play, in the case where they play back-to-back, we'll give them at least that 5-minute time to swap their batteries and tighten the screws. We'll do a 15-minute break after every 2 rounds of play. That's more for the division events. Before the matches start, you'll want to create or copy score sheets for every match so that we can record the score, and those become the official record of the score. They may not get entered into the scorekeeper computer instantly, but if there's ever any question about the scores, then we go back to those paper originals. So it's important that we record and preserve those pages. And we'll have, again, some instructions and some helpful tools on the resource page. So the scorekeeper has software that will generate the match schedule, and we can get a data file from them if anybody's ambitious enough to want to do the print merge thing for the score sheets. League events may not have a scorekeeper. If that happens, then the FTA will generate the schedule, and then either the FTA or a referee will enter the scores when we have breaks in the action. There's a schedule calculator on the resources page where you tell it how many matches you're running and what the spacing is, and it'll build a schedule for you. And again, either the head ref or the league coordinator at the event should keep all the score sheets. And it may be helpful to bring a laptop running Windows XP if you have one available.
Or does it have to be XP?
I don't know if it has to be XP or later. And I've tried doing it with the Mac, and that tends to be a problem. So I'm a big Mac guy, but it's all the first stuff runs on Windows, so it's generally not worth the struggle to try to use a Mac at these events. Here's the photo of this year's field. If you haven't had a chance to see it, I can just, let's see, yeah, the mouse works, that's cool. So the Blue Alliance players will be in this area when the match starts, the Red Alliance players here. They set up their robots on their half of the field. They're going to have these little 2-inch cubes that they score in these pendulum goals. So there's 4 of them on each side. You get different points for different positions on the goals. You also want to keep that pendulum balanced if you can. During autonomous, the robots can score blocks in the goals for extra points, or they can run up here onto these ramps. This area here collectively is called the bridge. So if you can get your robot either partially or completely up onto that bridge, then you get some points. And then there are blocks in these block areas, so robots can go pick up more blocks. Whoops. Pick up more blocks to score here. And then at the end of the match, robots can get onto the bar here on their half of the field and raise themselves up off the field and earn some points. And they can also turn the little crank here to raise their flag. So that's sort of the basics of this year's game. So before the matches start, you'll want to have the head ref at each event will want to have a driver's meeting. You can invite, all the students that want to, but you want to get at least one driver, the team captain, from each team to talk about the key rules and penalties, to explain the match flow, how that works. And basically, there'll be a queuer that will come and fetch teams ahead of their matches, and there'll be an on-deck queue so that teams are all ready to go as soon as the field becomes available for their match. And then they'll need to set up their robot on the field and make sure they satisfy all of those requirements. And then we play the match. And then as soon as the refs have completed the scoring sheets and showed them to a representative from each alliance, then we'll call for the field reset and start the whole process over again. And I previously mentioned the conference box for referee questions.
Do you want to talk about score sheet?
I think I get to that later.
Okay.
That's Kathy helping me out in the background. To set up for each match, each team consists of 2 student drivers plus 1 coach. The coach can also be a student or can be an adult, but only the student drivers are allowed to operate the robot controllers. We want to clear everyone else away from the field. The audience will want to get close to the field, so there's usually a fair amount of shooing them back occasionally. You can, lay down lines on the floor if you have to, but you want to ensure that that the refs have room to move around freely without tripping over students, just for safety's sake. Also, at the beginning of each match, you'll check all the field elements, make sure that everything looks like it's been reset correctly. You need to check that the robots are satisfying the rules for starting the match, and that every robot has a visible team number.
I think you're okay.
Okay, yeah, it's fine. Go to meeting is being a little weird. Let's see. Then once all the robots are in position, you'll want to make sure the teams aren't touching their controllers, and then you'll get we have to place an IR beacon, so we'll have the scorekeeper generate a random position for us. And once that position has been shown, then the teams aren't allowed to touch their robots or their controllers until the driver-operated part of the match begins. So we place those beacons, and then we signal the FTA to let them know it's okay to start the match. And then we just repeat that process over and over. So the IR beacons, the IR beacon is placed on one of the goals on each side of the field, and then if the teams can manage to score a block in that pendulum goal, then they get bonus points. And so that's placed randomly. The scorekeeper generates that. We put it on the same on each side. I propose calling the goals A, B, C, D, with A being the goal that's closest to the audience, so far away from where the FTA and scorekeeper are. And yeah, once that IR beacon position is known and the position's in its place, then teams can't fool with their robots anymore. So during the autonomous period, the drivers aren't allowed to touch the robot controls. The drivers and the coach have to stay in their alliance area. Pinning, we'll talk more about pinning later, but pinning is not called during autonomous. And other penalties count. So if a robot manages to run over the other side and whack the pendulum on the other side, then that penalty counts.
Yeah, question.
Oh, I see. Okay, looks like I've got a question from Dwayne Bradford. Let's see. Okay, Dwayne, you should be able to talk now. Dwayne, are you with us? Yeah, you can also type your question into the chat box if you like. Looks like Dwayne's having problems with his microphone, so yeah, Dwayne, if you want to just type your question into the chat box. Oh, wait, here it comes. Looks like he's having problems with his audio. Yeah, so just go ahead and type your question into the chat box, and I'll be happy to answer it. Yeah, so the beacon positions are right. I assume everybody can see this. The beacon positions are A to D left to right on both sides, right? No, I want to say that beacon position A is going to be the pendulum goal that's closest to the audience. So I think from the red side it'll be on the right, and from the blue side it'll be on the left. And you want to put that in the same position on both sides. Or are you saying that my concept of that field is backwards? Let's go take a look at the field. Yeah, so here on the field we're going to have the scorekeeper and the FTA back here, and then the audience on this side of the field. So I propose that this box on the blue side and this box on the red side be called A, and so forth.
And you've got more stuff.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, they said that doesn't match the build guide.
Ah, okay. Well,
I will research that.
I guess I'm wrong. And the real point is just talk with your scorekeeper and agree on terminology so that it's easy to communicate that which goal you're supposed to put things on. Oh, hey Susan, I'll try to move the mouse more slowly in the future. If I go to a meeting, I'll stop making it disappear. So cool. So sorry about the confusion there. I should have looked at the build documents, I guess. And Kathy's going to go look up, see if there's anything else helpful we can bring up. And I got a little ahead of myself. Okay. Okay, here we go. At the end of autonomous, we have to record any scoring that happened during the autonomous period. So if they scored blocks in the pendulum goals, or if they got up onto the bridge, we need to record that. If any robots got tangled up, or any robot got tipped over so that its drive wheels aren't on the carpet anymore, then the head ref is allowed to untangle them and get them upright again. It's important to confer with the team so that you don't, lift the robot or untangle them in a way that's going to break the robot. Don't want to have that happen. And I guess one small note is that if a block is still in contact with the matching alliance robot, so if you've got a block in the red pendulum goal and it's still being touched by a red robot, then that block isn't counted for scoring. Anyway, once you've got that all settled down, then signal the FTA to start the driver control period. Yeah, so I see your question, Beth. We'll make sure that the order of bins on the score sheet matches the order when you're standing outside the field facing them, please. I see. Yeah, we'll look at the score sheet in a bit and make sure that we're doing the right thing there. Okay, during the driver control period, if you've got two refs, I guess this applies to autonomous as well. If there's at least two refs at the event, then I recommend splitting, assigning, one ref to the blue side and one ref to the red side. That tends to work out better than, trying to have one ref watch both red robots, etc. You need to watch and note any penalties and be prepared to deal with descoring. So if descoring happens, meaning that if a robot comes and manages to remove blocks from the red pendulum, we need to assign penalties for that. And this year things are a little simpler in that if a block gets descored, then the penalty takes care of everything, and we don't have to remember to score that block. So if it gets descored, the score doesn't get counted, but the penalty is awarded, which then gives points to the opposing side. So that's how they're handling that this year, a little simpler than last year. So the top 6 things to watch for are pinning, and we'll talk a little bit more about pinning when we get to that rule. We need to watch for pendulum and flag contact. So Robots are not allowed to touch the opposing alliance's pendulum or flag assembly. Robots are limited to carrying, to either possessing or controlling a maximum of 4 blocks, so we have to keep an eye on that. If game elements go out of bounds, either the field reset crew or the referee should return those fields back to the, or I'm sorry, return those blocks back to the field as quickly as is safe and reasonable and close to where they left the field. We want to make sure robots aren't allowed to either start lifting or to raise their flag before we get to the last 30 seconds to get to that end game. So make sure that doesn't happen. And then during the end game, you're not allowed to mess with your robot, with your opposing alliance robots that are trying to either lift up on that bar or to raise their flag. At the end of the match, we want to record all the scoring elements, record any penalties. We show those score sheets. Once you've got the score sheets filled out and had your conference with the other referees, the head ref should invite a representative from each alliance to come and look at the score sheet. And that way, if there's any questions about scoring, it gets resolved right there, and there's no issues later. And then have those representatives, one from each side, initial the score sheet. As soon as you're done with the field, so that means at the point where both of your alliance representatives say they're okay, go ahead and signal the FTA that it's okay to reset the field, and then have them do their initialing the sheet. And once you're done with the score sheet, either give it to the scorekeeper, or hopefully we'll have a runner that'll come and pick up the score sheet from you and give it to the scorekeeper. Well, also during the score review, we want to talk to the teams about any penalties that happened. And anytime you have a spare moment, look for students in the referee question box. Okay, so here's the score sheet, which was just uploaded today, so I haven't had a bunch of time to...
You got the thing about moving the mouse more slowly.
So I've had a bunch of time to review it, but you can see we... Right, so during the autonomous period, we record the number of blocks that are in the special IR goal, the number of blocks that are in the pendulum goals. Now, I need to get some clarification whether that includes the block that's in the... So if I've got, for example, one block in the IR goal and one block in a pendulum goal other than the IR goal, do I record 1 and 1, or do I record 1 and 2? It needs to match what the scorekeeper software is, and I haven't seen that yet. I suspect I would record 1 and 1 rather than double count the 1 in the IR goal, but last year it was kind of goofy, so we need to make sure we get it right. Number of blocks in the floor goal, a number of robots that are partially on the bridge, so that means that some part of the robot has crossed the outer boundary of the ramps that compose the bridge, or if the robot's fully on the bridge, meaning that it's completely on the bridge and no part of the robot extends out beyond the boundary of the bridge. At the end of the driver control period, we note the number of blocks in each of the 4 goals, the front goals, outer and inner, and the rear goals, inner and outer, and then how many are on the floor goal. Then we also record the flag position. It can either be down in the low zone or in the high zone. And then we record the number of robots hanging. And then there's an indicator that'll tell you whether or not the pendulum's balanced. And the pendulum is balanced only if the indicator is completely within the part of the dial, I guess. I haven't seen it yet. That denotes that it's balanced. Then we list the number of minor penalties, the number of major penalties, record the team numbers, and mark off if they didn't show up, meaning either the robot didn't show up and they didn't send a team representative, so that's what no-show means, or if they got disqualified because they violated some heinous rule. Okay, let's see what questions. Okay, so Beth asks, as I read the rules, on means supported by. it's okay if part of it crosses the boundary. Is that not correct? So, so you're talking about the bridge.
Mm-hmm.
Where's the bridge?
Robots on correction. At the autonomous.
Perhaps I did not read that rule carefully. So if the rules and I disagree, then the rules are correct. Okay. So there are a number of rules where there are escalating penalties. And the rules will say something like, will result in a penalty or disqualification. In those cases, the penalties escalate perhaps from a warning. So, for example, the rule about team members have to stay within the alliance area. So if somebody steps out of the alliance area, first time it happens, you warn them. If they do it again, then it's a minor penalty. And if they just repeatedly do it and totally ignore your instructions, then you can escalate that up to a major penalty and even a disqualification if you decide that their behavior is sufficiently egregious. So there's a number of events or of infractions that escalate that way. And those will be called out on the rule reference card. And also there's a summary at the end of the part 2 of the game manual that lists all the penalties for each rule. Okay, so the tournament rules. So these are sort of the things that sort of govern the overall tournament. So I guess the big one is that Rule T1, that referees have the ultimate gameplay and scoring authority during the competition. The referee rulings are final. So that means that, you know, the buck stops with us, and that also means that we have a big responsibility to get things as right as we possibly can. But there's, you know, once we've made our final ruling, then there's no arguing with the event coordinator or anything. We get the final say. Another important thing is no matter what happens, we're not allowed to review video or photos from the match. So if a team comes up and says, hey, you know, you didn't count our blocks right, we had 5 blocks, and I've got a picture that shows it, you can't look at that photo. We're not allowed to either award scores or penalties for something we didn't see. And we're not allowed, we're especially not allowed to look at pictures or video. So don't do that. If there's a question for the ref, so this is the thing that defines the ref question box. So if a team has a question, the way they do it is they send one student drive team member to go stand in that box and talk to the ref. They're not allowed to send multiple students, and they're not allowed to send an adult. So if you get an adult coach trying to ask you about a ruling, then just politely tell them that you can only talk to students about rulings and to have them send a student to ask the question. Likewise, if you have 3 students coming up and they're, you know, pounding on you 3-on-1, just ask politely, say you've got to pick one of you to talk and the other 2 need to leave, and have a one-on-one conversation with that student. And finally, teams are allowed access to the field only for the robots. So they're not allowed to get onto the field so that they can judge whether or not their robot's touching the floor and whether or not that block has crossed the boundary of the goal or whatever. So that's the purview of the referees, and team members are not allowed to do that. So T2 just defines what the team is, 2 student drivers plus 1 coach. Ideally, we have badges so that it's easy to tell which one the coach is, especially if the coach is a student. It may not be easy to tell, and we need to know which one the coach is so that we know who is allowed and not allowed to touch the controls, because only the 2 student drivers can operate the robot. There are no timeouts allowed during the qualifying matches. There just aren't. We maintain that schedule, and that means that teams may have to play with a broken robot. We'll always allow them that 5-minute break between their previous match and their next match, but beyond that, there's no timeouts. We've got to keep the schedule rolling. And right, as I mentioned earlier, we can have back-to-back matches, so I need to keep that 5 minute in there. at the division matches where we're playing on 2 fields and we're playing constant, one match after another with the other field being set up so that the referees there's basically no break for the refs. At those events, then we need to make sure that we have 15-minute breaks every couple of rounds so that, we have an opportunity to breathe and maybe visit the restroom or refill a water bottle. Okay, that's like the 4th time that's been covered. During the elimination matches, so after we get past the league events and we have elimination matches, each alliance is allowed 1 timeout during the elimination matches. So that's 1 and only 1. And so if they call a timeout during the semifinals, then they don't get another timeout during the finals. So we need to keep track of which teams, which alliances have called for a timeout, and then they don't get to do it again. That won't be an issue at the league events, just at the division and state events. Everyone in the pits and on the field needs to wear safety glasses or prescription glasses with side shields. And we have a new tournament rule this year, and it's a big one. No team member or event attendee is allowed to set up their own Wi-Fi. So that means no cell phone hotspots, no ad hoc networks, no Nintendo DS peer-to-peer. You can't have your phone or your tablet running as a Wi-Fi access point. And teams are not allowed to use Bluetooth in the arena. They can use Bluetooth in the practice area and in the pits, but not in the arena area. And the penalty for this is gigantic. It's a DQ for the entire team, and they are removed from the event venue. They're disqualified from that entire event, and there's no refund of event fees. So first is, this is a big problem. They've had issues with people setting up Wi-Fi access points and spoofing the field and doing things to interfere with the Wi-Fi communications, and it's a huge problem. And so they are bringing out the big hammer on that this year. So if anybody gets caught doing any of this stuff, then the punishment is pretty harsh. And the head ref will coordinate with the FTA and also the league coordinator in deciding whether or not to hand out this gigantic penalty. But I would definitely mention that during opening ceremonies and during the driver meeting before the matches. Okay, so going back to Beth's question, she's right. It's on versus in
context
for determining whether robots are on the bridge, whether they get that bridge bonus during autonomous. So if some of the weight of the robot is supported by the bridge, then they get credit for being partially on the bridge. If the weight of the robot is fully supported by the bridge, then they get credit for being completely on the bridge. So it doesn't matter if they have an arm or part of their frame that's dangling over the edge, as long as all of their weight is supported by the ramps, they get the point. So great, thanks, Pat. Let's see, Dave Isola asks whether they're notifying teams about the Wi-Fi before events. Yeah, they did the revision 1.1 rules that was called out specifically, so teams should be well aware of that. Susan asks, how do we know who is doing a Wi-Fi hotspot? Yeah, that's a hard question. It can be, if they're just doing it to be jerks, it can be very difficult to tell. But we can do things with doing signal strength if we really have to track somebody down. And hopefully just the fear of that gigantic penalty will discourage people from doing anything obnoxious. Okay, so some of the general rules for the robots that matter to the rest. I'll just talk about a few of these. Each team's only allowed one competition robot per event, so that means they can't have a team that has 2 robots there and they alternate back and 4th. That way they get more time to repair between matches. That's not allowed. Yeah, I don't know if that happens, but it's against the rules. Robots have to pass inspection before they're allowed to play in a match. The inspectors may allow them to play practice matches before the qualifying matches begin, but they cannot play qualifying or elimination matches if they haven't passed inspection. And if they make any significant changes to their robot, then they need to request a reinspection. A team that refuses reinspection will be disqualified. I've never seen that happen. Hopefully we won't see any of that. And we'll be doing peer inspection at the league events, and the head ref may be asked to rule on any controversial inspection issues. So I wouldn't worry about knowing the robot inspection rules nearly as well as knowing the game rules, but it's worth at least a quick perusal of those rules so that if you get asked about it, you have a starting point, and you'll want to have a copy of those rules with you so that you can look things up if you get called on to make a ruling. The robot main power switch must be mounted in a readily accessible and visible way. Just in case a robot goes out of control, we need to be able to turn it off. The robots have to have a flag holder that will hold the flag up at the top of the robot so that it's clearly visible throughout the match. That lets us know which alliance each robot is on. That's super important that we can tell that instantly just by looking at the robot, so they need to have good flag holders. They also have to have their team number displayed prominently so that it's visible from all around the robot. The wording on the ruling is a little confusing. It says it has to be on at least two sides separated by 180 degrees. And what they mean by that is if you have, say, a robot that's shaped like a cube, you can't put your robot numbers on two adjacent faces. They have to be on opposite faces so that I can see those two sides. So I can see one of those two team number signs no matter how the robot is oriented relative to me. And those numbers have to be, in a contrasting color from the background. And it's a frequent issue. People often do things. They put a dark blue number on a dark gray background, and it's very hard to see. And since it's important to be able to identify robots quickly, we really need to be firm about that issue. Yeah, it's good to be aware of the rest of the rules, but I wouldn't bother trying to memorize them. Just give them maybe a once-over shortly before the match, like the day before or something. Again, there's a bunch of rules about what parts and materials and a bunch of software rules, and those are all robot inspection issues, and it's worth having an idea of what's in there, but if you have to make a ruling, then you'll be allowed, obviously you'll just get a copy of the rules and look it up and help people interpret it. Okay, gameplay. That's a nice slide. Yeah, I had a little bit of last-minute chaos with my slides and didn't get them all fixed. So what we're going to talk about now is just sort of the flow of the match. And so before the match starts, the referees need to make sure that all of the robots touch exactly one field wall. So they have to touch one that's on their side. They can't touch two field walls. They can't extend into the block zone or touch any blocks in the block zone. They must be completely on their half of the field. They're allowed to be in contact with exactly one block. So each robot is allowed to start with a block in contact with their robot. It can also be in touch with the floor, but it's not allowed to be in contact with their other alliance robot. Once all that's set up, then the head ref does the thing with placing the IR beacons. Then during autonomous, the robots can place blocks in the pendulum gulls to win big points. They don't, be sure to not score any blocks that are still touching their color robot at the end of autonomous. Record any block placements on the score sheet, and record any robots that are partially or completely on the bridge ramps. And we don't have to know the points. We don't have to know the points for penalties and for scoring. We just mark the stuff on the score sheet, and then the scorekeeper enters that into the software, and that determines the points. It's nice if you're familiar with it, but personally, if students try to ask me how many points is this or that, I just tell them to go read the rules, because I don't want to have to do arithmetic on the fly or risk making a mistake for something that they can easily look up themselves. More fun with slides. During the driver control period, they're going to be scoring blocks in the pendulum goals and the floor goals. They're going to try to balance the pendulum. They're going to try to hang the robots and possibly to raise the flags. A couple of notes. It's illegal to score blocks in the opponent's pendulum during the end game. It's actually okay to put blocks in your opponent's pendulum during the first minute and a half of the match, but during the end game, you can't do that, and that's just to allow them an opportunity to get their pendulum balanced. If somebody does do that, then they get a major penalty for every block that they scored, plus the opposing team gets credit for a balanced pendulum, even if it's not balanced. And it's also actually very illegal. It's not as illegal as it was last year, but it's still illegal to discore blocks from the pendulum goals. So even a red robot cannot remove a block from the red pendulum. That's a major penalty for doing that, and it's a major penalty for doing it on the opponent's side as well. So don't do that. It is okay to remove blocks from the floor, because just as you're driving around, it could be very difficult to avoid doing that. So they do allow the removal of blocks from the floor goal. During the end game, the last 30 seconds, now robots can grab onto that bar, and that pull-up bar, and raise their robot. And lifting is protected from interference. They're also allowed to now start spinning the little handle on their flag assembly and raise their flag. And again, they're protected once they're in that zone, in the flag zone. So let's talk about some of the game rules. First off, there's two safety rules. The first one says that if the head ref decides that a robot is unsafe, the robot may be disabled and the team disqualified and required to be re-inspected before they're allowed back on the field. So, again, safety is our number one priority. So if a robot's out of control or doing something unsafe that's damaging either people or other robots or field elements, then they can be disabled.
Go back one slide. You've got the lifting from last year. You need to talk about the chin-up bar and the flags.
That's what I mean. Sorry, Kathy's helping me out here. By lifting, I mean lifting yourself up on the pull-up bar.
Okay. And I can't talk about the flags. You said lifting another robot on that slide. I just want to clarify. I don't think they can lift the other.
Oh, did I say lifting another robot? Okay, so Kathy says I said lifting another robot. So. Oh, you're right. Hey, what do you know? That's a bullet item left over from last year's slides. There is no lifting another robot. Although, actually, it's okay when you're counting whether or not a robot is hanging. It's okay if some of its weight is supported by another hanging robot. But this year we're not allowing robots to explicitly lift another robot. Except, I don't know. Fine, maybe there's some way you can twist the rules. It's allowed to have part of your weight supported by a robot that's hanging. That's the real thing. Okay, safety rule S2. Here we go. If any part of a robot makes contact with anything outside the field perimeter, it will be disabled. So if a robot pokes a part outside the field perimeter, yeah, they're not allowed to start that way. And if that happens, it's not instantly a penalty, but as soon as they touch anything, a person, the floor outside of the field, anything, then they get disabled. At the beginning of the match, before the match starts, the robot has to fit into the volume of an 18-inch cube. So it's handy to have a ruler so that you can see, a lot of times people have some sort of arm or something, and it needs to be in its proper starting position before we can start the match. If they can't get it done in a timely fashion, then they get disabled at the head ref's discretion. And also part of this is the teams aren't allowed to use alignment devices unless they're part of the robot and fit inside that 18-inch cube. So if they want to, have some sort of sights or something they use, that's fine. But it has to be made out of legal robot parts on the robot and within the 18-inch cube. They're not allowed to bring out a ruler or a sextant or anything that they use to line up their robot. We've talked about the drive team before. This is another thing that's a little stronger this year, is that electronic communication devices cannot be used once the drive team is called to the field. So they can't have cell phones, they can't be talking on cell phones, they can't be texting, they can't have radios. So no electronic communication devices once the team is called to the field. And that will earn a penalty or a disqualification if they keep doing it. The team members have to stay within their alliance station. That's one of the escalating penalties, which we talked about that earlier. There's no penalty, obviously, if they have to scramble out of the way because somebody's launched a block at their head. That's a fine excuse for stepping out of the alliance area, and there's no penalty for that. And, I've noticed students will occasionally break this rule. They'll step out, but the worst offenders are usually the adult coaches, especially if they're trying to take video. Then they're not watching where they are. And I've had adults argue with me, no, I wasn't stepping outside, and they have no idea because they weren't watching their feet. They were looking through their video camera. So anyway, try to keep that under control. It's a safety issue. Coaches aren't allowed to touch the playing field or the game elements or the controls, and drivers aren't allowed to touch the playing field or the game elements once the match has started. Again, that's another case of escalating penalties from warnings up to disqualification. Contact that affects scoring results in an immediate disqualification. So, yeah, if they do something that actually affects the outcome. Coaches aren't allowed to touch the controls or otherwise operate the robot. And again, another escalating penalties case. At the end of both the autonomous period and the driver-operated period, we wait for all objects to come to rest before we score things. So if if a robot's trying to hang, but it doesn't have enough friction or torque on its drive to hold it up there and it's slowly falling down, we wait till it comes to rest before we score things. Yeah, I think this year mostly it's going to be an issue on the pull-up bar. So I don't know if there's anything else that's likely. I guess if blocks are jiggling around on the pendulum, or if the pendulum's jiggling, we wait for it to come to a stop before we make those scoring determinations. Robots aren't allowed to drop parts on the field. Now, it's, little parts will fall off from time to time, but if it's something that affects the gameplay, then they get penalized for that. Robots are not allowed to grab, grasp, grapple, or attach to any playing field element unless that's specifically allowed. And we'll talk about the rules that allows that in a bit. And again, that's another escalation. Yeah, so G9 says that you're not allowed to have strategies that are aimed solely at destruction or damage or tipping over or entanglements of robots. Now, that'll happen from time to time. I mean, it's an active game, and there'll be strong defense. So if something happens as a result of gameplay, that's one thing. But if a robot's obviously doing something that damages or tips over other robots, then we get to assign penalties. So pinning and trapping, they've added trapping to the rules this year just to make it clear. A pinning penalty is called when one robot prevents an opposing robot from moving in all directions. So that means it's completely boxed in, either pressed up against the field or pressed up against another robot so that there's no way that they can escape. If that happens, then we point at the robot, we call out that it's pinning, and we start a 5-second countdown. And I tend to start that countdown at 2 seconds because by the time I've realized that it's actually a pinning condition, then at least 1 second has passed by. Then once they get to the 5-second mark, then they earn a penalty, and then they earn another penalty every 5 seconds that it persists. And in order to stop earning penalties, the pinning robot has to back up at least 3 feet, which that's about the width of 1.5 of the floor tiles. It's a good way to eyeball it. And again, that's an escalating penalty. You start out with a minor penalty and then get disabled if a team just keeps doing it repeatedly. G11 says that the actions of one robot can not cause another robot to earn a penalty. So if a red robot pushes a blue robot into the red pendulum, the blue robot doesn't get a penalty. Oh, oops, there's a little bit of text left over from last year's slides. So my example doesn't make sense this year. And teams, again, I've got some old text here, sorry about that. Teams can't exploit this rule. So again, in that case, suppose a red robot pushes the blue robot into the red pendulum. The blue robot doesn't get a penalty for being pushed into the pendulum, but once that red robot backs away, then the blue robot has to immediately get out of that situation, otherwise it will earn the penalty. So they can't say, oh, I got pushed there, so I'm just going to park there. They have to remedy that situation if it happens. Robots have to be designed to allow easy removal of the scoring elements. So that means at the end of the match, I need to be able to remove those blocks without requiring powering the robot up or getting the controllers working. They just have to be, quickly removed. And if a robot has a design issue, then you can require them to pass inspection to get that issue fixed before they're allowed to play again.
Yeah.
Pinning must be an absolute stop if they can wiggle no pin.
Is that trapping?
Well, gosh, I don't know. I guess I'd have to see it. I mean, if they can move a millimeter, then they're still trapped. Likewise, if they're pinned in up against the wall and they can only move a little bit, I mean, I think the real issue is, can they escape the situation? Is there a direction that they can move to get out of that situation? If that's not the case, then they are pinned or trapped. And again, we need to let the pinning robot know that that's an issue so that they know to back up before they incur a penalty. This rule doesn't tend to come up too much, but technically, during qualifying matches, the Blue Alliance is supposed to place their robots, and then the Red Alliance gets the opportunity to place and position their robots after Blue is done, and then Blue can't go back and wiggle their robots again. Doesn't seem to happen too much during qualifying matches. They don't tend to worry about that too much. During the elimination matches, then the higher ranked team gets the final move. So the number 4 seed alliance places their robots, and then the number 1 seed alliance gets to do the final placement. And so be sure to make sure that happens. If the alliance that has the right to move last wants to exercise that right, make sure they can. On the other hand, teams that are exploiting this to deliberately delay the start of a match can be penalized or disqualified. So you can't monkey around with this as a way to, allow your alliance partner to get their robot on the field or something. Matches can be replayed at the discretion of the head ref. Basically, when a game element fails in a consequential way, or robots lose control because of a verifiable field failure that affects the game outcome. Just because a team loses control of their robot, there's a lot of things that can cause that. If their battery voltage is low, if they have a loose connection, if their brick has been on all day long, the bricks just tend to get tired after a while. None of those things would motivate replaying a match. On the other hand, if a field element fails, if a pendulum falls off, or the FTA can see that something bad happened with the router or with communications, then you want to replay it. So that doesn't happen too often, and you'll hear some complaining from teams that have intermittent control issues, but that's generally speaking not a field failure. We talked about the head ref untangling robots and putting them back on their feet if necessary. And really what we want is crazy things happen during autonomous, and we don't want that to take a robot completely out of the game just because they bumped into another robot and ended up falling over. So try to get things put back together. If two robots are so deeply tangled that they can't be untangled, then the guidance I've gotten from the head ref training is that then those two robots should effectively be disabled. Hopefully that's going to be a pretty rare occurrence that we can't get things fixed. Let's see. Beth says G13C appears to have been written backwards. It should be that the team with the right to place last can waive the right.
Right, which you said correctly.
Yeah. So, yeah, I don't know if G13's worded oddly, but the team that has the right to place last can waive that right. And in practice, usually it just slips by unless somebody says, hey, we want to be able to place last. Field elements can vary by plus or minus an inch, so whining about that's not going to get you anywhere. And that said, we want to keep the field in as good a shape and as close to spec as we can. Wow, that's an exciting slide. This is the egregious behavior. So this is our sort of final tool for teams that are doing things that are really completely outside of the spirit of the competition and being incredibly rude or obnoxious in a way that's just completely unacceptable. The head ref has the right to disqualify the team and even disqualify them either from a match or from the remainder of the tournament if teams are really behaving in a completely unacceptable way. And yeah, I read that in the rules instead of reading my crazy slide. Okay, how are we doing on time here? Yeah, so this is supposed to run for an hour.
No, it was till 9.
Oh, was it till 9? Oh, great! I get to talk longer. Lucky you. Okay, well, thanks for hanging in. Everybody here is up for hour 2 of our presentation. And I'm not going to go through every single rule here. Be sure to read everything, but I do want to talk about some of the more important and some of the trickier ones. I don't know if this one's particularly tricky. Well, actually, it is kind of tricky. So a robot's only allowed to possess or control 4 blocks at any time. And possess and control are defined in the rules. Control means that you're pushing a block, right? So the block moves with the robot. Possess means that the block is basically locked in so that if your robot turns, then the block moves with it. So pushing a block is one thing, and then grabbing or pinching or otherwise corralling a block so that it goes with you even as you change orientation. That's what we call possessing. But you're not allowed to either control or possess more than 4 blocks at a time. Now, suppose you've got 4 blocks. You're holding 4 blocks, and you plow into a pile of blocks, and they scatter as you go by. That's okay. On the other hand, if you've got some sort of a bulldozer on the front of your robot, so that when you collide with blocks, you just keep pushing them and they stay with you, then that counts towards your count, and if it puts you over, you get a penalty. So you get a minor penalty for each block over 4, and that penalty gets repeated again for every 5 seconds that the condition persists. And if you either possess or control more than 4 blocks, then any blocks that you score while you're in that condition don't count. So I'm hoping that doesn't happen too often, because it's going to be a real pain for the referees. We have to watch for robots carrying 5 blocks and scores 1. Well, we have to remember that block was scored illegally and not counted at the end. And then, after they've scored that one, now they're only carrying 4, so now anything they score subsequently will be fine. So anyway, another case where we have to keep notes if that situation happens so that we score it correctly at the end of the match.
Beth commented on it being hard to score, but I think you addressed that about fouling. So you could just reiterate in response to Beth's.
Yeah, so Beth points out that this will probably be the most annoying rule to enforce, and probably with a little bit of experience, hopefully it'll be obvious to know when to count it and when not to count it. So yeah, and teams will have to learn that if they've got a scoop at the front of their robot and they drive through a bunch of blocks, then that's going to up their count and get them into trouble. So they'll have to take that into account in how they design their robots and how they play the game. GS2 says robots are not allowed to touch the opposing alliance pendulum except when scoring. So a blue robot cannot touch the red pendulum unless they're scoring blocks on the red pendulum. I don't think that's going to happen very much. I guess maybe you could do that. You could give your opponent a few points and make their pendulum so unbalanced that they can't get it balanced. I don't know, that seems a little crazy to me, but we'll see if it happens. It's a major penalty every time you do it. So, wow, that's huge. That's 50 points. So, yeah, I don't think people are going to do that. And it's not a penalty. There's a number of rules like this where contacting that pendulum is not a penalty if it's both inadvertent and inconsequential. So said another way, if this is something that they intentionally did, even if it doesn't have a consequence, the penalty counts. Likewise, if it has a consequence, even if it was an accident, it counts. So in order to not count, it has to be both inadvertent and inconsequential. We'll see some more of those. Robots are not allowed to score or de-score blocks from the opposing pendulum during the end game. Typo there. So what that means is the Red Alliance is the only one that can score on the red pendulum during the last 30 seconds of the match. So they get that last 30 seconds is their opportunity to get things balanced. And again, that's a major penalty. And the opponents get credit for a balanced pendulum, even if it's not pendulum, if that happens. So if blue scores a block on the red pendulum during the last 30 seconds, then red gets credit for having a balanced pendulum, regardless of what the actual state of the pendulum is at the end of the game. Robots can't remove blocks from the pendulum anytime. So that means if a team is trying to get their pendulum balanced, the only way they can do that is by adding blocks. They cannot remove blocks. And again, that's a major penalty, even if it's their own goal. But it is allowed to de-score from the floor goals, again, because that can be totally inadvertent just as you're driving, so the game allows for de-scoring things from the floor goals. Skipping a few rules here, we've got a GS7. During the end game, a robot may not block access to the opposing hanging zone or interfere with a hanging robot. So what does that mean? That means that the Red Alliance can't keep the Blue Alliance from getting into their hanging zone or into their flag zone. I guess there's a separate rule for that. We'll get to that in a moment. And doing that earns them a major penalty. Robots are not allowed to contact the opposing flag assembly at any time. Again, this is a major penalty unless it's both inadvertent and inconsequential. So if somebody drives by and just manages to tap it with their flag or something, that's no big deal. But if they really whack into it, or if they're doing something intentional, then they get the penalty.
Beth brings up a good thing about balancing. And I think the answer is we need to get first to and amend the rules probably.
Yeah, that is a good point. So Beth has written here, I expected to see a rule that an alliance doesn't get points for balancing if they're touching their own pendulum, but I don't see one. I agree. I actually read all of the rules again today, and I did not see that. So I'll be asking a question first. And actually, I read through most of the Q&A on the site today, and I wasn't looking for that but I didn't notice anything either. But that's clearly an issue. I'm sure they don't want to allow that. So this is the promised rule. You're not allowed to block access to the opposing alliance's flag zone during the end game, and again, it's a major penalty. Robots are not allowed to grab the crank or pull-up bar prior to the start of the game. So if your robot wants to hang, it can't go up and grab onto the bar until we get into that 30-second period at the end of the match. If they do, then the penalty is that their alliance score, the whole alliance score, gets dropped to 0 for that element. So if you have some robot that clamps onto its bar early, say a red robot clamps onto its bar early, then the red alliance won't get any credit for hanging, no matter what happens. Likewise, if they go over and grab the crank for their flag assembly before the 30-second period starts, then their alliance can't earn any points for raising the flag. And there's no penalty for contact that is both inadvertent and inconsequential. So if a robot drives over the bridge and maybe just touches the bar with their flag, that's not a penalty. But if they're doing something that's either intentional or that has a consequence, then they get the penalty. GS11, teams are not allowed to touch their robot or controller after the IR beacons have been placed. So yeah, we've talked about that previously. And so they get a minor penalty, and also that team's robot won't get credited with any blocks that it scores during the autonomous period. GS12 is the exception to the earlier rule. It says that robots, in fact, can grab, grasp, grapple, and attach to the pull-up bar, the flag assembly, and the blocks. And you can see I duplicated a slide here. Forgot to delete the second bullet item, so please ignore that second bullet item.
You got a question from Beth.
Ah, cool. So now we're to the any questions part. Okay. So Beth asks, blocking access to flag zone or hanging is the other rule that seems problematic for refs. If a robot is parked in the way, but the opponent can get there by driving around it, is that a penalty? How hard can they make it before it becomes a penalty? Well, yeah, that's obviously, all of these things are going to boil down to judgment calls. The way I would call that, well, first off, I would keep an eye on the Q&As to see if anything comes up in this area. But I would say as long as there's a way for a robot to get into the zone, then that's fine. And Kathy disagrees. So, yeah, I wonder what's going to happen if a red robot's trying to get into the flag area and a blue robot's moving back and forth blocking access.
That's penalty.
That's probably a penalty. If a robot's just parked there and if a blue robot's just parked there and a red robot can drive around it, then that's probably okay. That's my feeling. But if the blue robot is actively moving back and forth to prevent the robot from getting into that zone, then I would say that's a penalty. And again, we'll want to watch for guidance from first. Q&A has already addressed this. Scott Smith tells us, once a single path has been blocked, no other path can be blocked, so it can't do a ping pong block. Okay, cool. Robert Hopp asks, what happens if red robot breaks down in the way of the zone and is blocking getting to the flag? I think being broken down does not exempt you from penalties. So if you have a robot that falls down or falls apart and completely blocks access to the flag zone, then they incur that penalty. I mean, otherwise it seems like that would be an easy loophole to exploit, saying, oh, my robot stopped working. Can't do anything. So, yeah, if somebody's denied access to their flag zone, then I think they would earn the penalty. Beginning, I'd keep an eye on the Q&A. Any other questions? Let's see, just a note, Washington runs the FTC matches pretty early in the season because we try to not overlap FTC and FRC. So we're kind of pushing the envelope. Like, for example, the score sheets didn't get uploaded today until a few hours after I said, hey, where are the score sheets? So there's some other things. There's some perhaps ref training documents and ref testing that I don't completely understand what FIRST is going to supply. I'll be following up with that. And I'll be sending email to everyone that's signed up as a ref on the volunteer system. So please, if you're interested in being a ref, get over to that volunteer.firstwa.org and get signed up. And then I'll use that to contact refs. And could I please email the direct link to the Q&A? Sure, I'll put that on the resources page. I have a hard time keeping track of who I've emailed stuff to, but on that ref resources page, I'll put those links. Let me just go back to one of the slides that shows that link so that you can copy that down.
And in answer to Beth's question about Eastside, there will eventually be events for weeks 2 and 3. I do not know why they're up yet, but Eastside will have its own league events for weeks 2 and 3.
So there's the link to the referee. Oh, no, that's not it.
Yeah.
No, is that it?
Yeah. That's
the resources page?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So there's the link to the referee resources page. It's out of date right now. It's got stuff up from last year. Some things still apply, like the schedule calculator, but I'll get all the other stuff updated shortly.
And the link for volunteering.
And what?
The link for volunteering is at the top of the page.
Oh, right, and the link for volunteering is at the top of the page up here. So, yeah, definitely get signed up in the system. Have I mentioned that before? Get signed up on the volunteer system. Okay, any other questions? Looks like we're winding down then. Well, thank you very much for enduring this long training session on a Friday evening. I'll be in touch with updates to that resources page and once I figure out how the ref testing is going to work. And I've been recording this session, so we'll make that available for anyone that couldn't make it or had to leave early. And thanks again for volunteering to be a referee. Obviously, these competitions can't run without referees, so we need your help desperately, and we greatly appreciate you spending your weekend time helping these kids do awesome things with their robots. Have a good evening, everyone, and I hope to see you at the matches.